You really have to hear what this team encountered. If you stay with me to the end, you will understand why 3 deaths in one Texas canyon were filed as misadventure when the body said something else. On October 17, 2019, in Palo Duro Canyon State Park, 5 people went below the rim after dark and only 2 came out alive. By sunrise, 1 body had been found near a dry wash with both boots set side by side a few feet away. Toes pointed toward the stone wall as if he had taken them off for bed. He had not. The second body would be recovered before noon, face down in red dust, heart stopped without a mark on her skin. No head wound, no bite, no fall severe enough to explain it. The third was never found whole enough for the county to describe with confidence. Before lunch, the first explanation was already moving through radios and text chains. Exposure, disorientation, bad footing, panic. It was wrong. The medic who saw the first man told the ranger at the rim that he looked as if the inside of him had been emptied out faster than a single night could account for. The county medical examiner later wrote that the cause of death could not be reconciled with heat, cold, dehydration, infarction, or known toxin. What comes next is the account. My name is Micah Redbird. I was 43 years old then. I am a Kiowa cultural archivist, and at that point I had spent 16 years recording oral history across the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, and eastern New Mexico. I had worked in church basements, tribal offices, back porches, county libraries, and kitchen tables where people kept the old things in coffee cans and shoeboxes. Palo Duro Canyon was not some distant landmark to me. My grandmother spoke of it as if it were a relative who had outlived every insult done to it. I had camped above the rim when I was a boy. I had walked the floor in daylight with park historians. I knew its smell after rain, the chalk taste of the dust, the way the evening sun laid copper across the walls. Nothing had ever frightened me. That changed at Palo Duro Canyon. The trip began as a documentary interview. Elder Eli Nighthorse had agreed, after 3 refusals, to let me record a warning he said should have been given on camera years ago. Eli was 78, a Kiowa elder and retired school custodian, and he had the habit of pausing so long before an answer that people sometimes mistook him for tired. He was never tired. He had spent his whole life measuring what not to say. He told me there was a place in the canyon where the old camp trails bent around a side draw and never crossed it after sundown. He told me there was a reason children had once been counted before dusk and counted again after dark. He said if I was going to put his words in front of strangers, then I had to stand where those words belonged. The rest of the team came from the production side and the park. Sarah Beck was 39, the senior ranger on duty that week, with 14 years in Texas parks and a way of speaking that made panic feel childish. Tessa Vale was 32, camera operator, 9 years in documentary field work, patient and exact, the kind of person who leveled a tripod by feel. Nolan Pierce was 26, audio technician, 10 months into his first full-time contract, bright, restless, always tapping one finger against his recorder case. He was the newest, and the canyon seemed to notice him first. Eli looked at Nolan before we left the parking area and said, very quietly, "If something calls you by name after dark, you let it go unanswered." Nolan gave a thin smile and said he would. Sarah told him the same thing, thinking Eli meant prank hikers or acoustics. We all accepted the rule because it cost us nothing then. Our destination was an old line shack in a lower branch of the canyon, used decades ago by ranch hands before the state park boundaries settled into their current form. It sat roughly 12 miles from the nearest staffed help if you counted road and trail together, farther in practical terms once you were below the rim and committed to the switchbacks. The canyon is broad in photographs. On foot, it becomes a system of cuts inside cuts, walls inside walls, stone folding space into pockets that hide light and throw sound. The Prairie Dogtown Fork had worked on that place for ages beyond counting, carving shelves, blind bends, washouts, and narrow channels where a man could stand 30 yards from you and disappear. Hoodoos stood on some ridges like lookouts. Juniper and mesquite filled the lower pockets. Cottonwoods marked the wetter ground. From the floor you could feel the walls pressing in even when the sky above was clean and wide. We went down in late afternoon. Eli sat in the passenger seat of the park truck and kept his hat in his lap. Tessa filmed the descent in long, steady passes through the windshield. Nolan checked levels and asked ordinary questions because ordinary questions keep people from saying they are uneasy. Sarah drove. I kept my notes on my knee and watched the color change as we dropped. The bright upper light thinned into layered red and brown. Shadow gathered early in the cuts. Eli pointed once, toward a narrow side ravine choked with scrub and stone. "Not there," he said. "Even in daylight, not there." Sarah nodded without arguing. She knew the map. Still, when we reached the shack, I noticed the side ravine lay less than 200 yards away. The shack was 3 walls, a patched roof, a rusted drum, a metal cot frame, and a fenced rectangle that had once held feed. It was enough shelter to stage lights, stash water, and record an interview before heading out. Tessa got the camera set. Nolan ran a boom and 2 ambient recorders. I mic'd Eli. Sarah checked our radios and counted batteries. The sun was still above the upper rim, but down where we stood the shade had already turned the air flat and cool. Eli began with history. He spoke of old camps and warnings, of people who knew the canyon better than we did and still avoided certain cuts after dark. He did not use the language outsiders like. He did not say ghost. He did not say curse. He said there are places where something older than the camps learned the shape of human attention. He said it can wait in stone the way heat waits in stone. He said it does not chase every person it notices. Chooses. We broke just before sunset. That was when Tessa found the shirt. It was a denim work shirt laid across a flat rock near the wash. Sleeves folded inward, buttons fastened to the neck. No dust on the shoulders. No sign it had blown there. The cloth was faded and stiff with age, but it sat as neatly as something arranged for a photograph. Sarah asked if it was part of an old site. Eli would not touch it. He said, "That is not lost clothing." 10 minutes later, Nolan called us over to a strip of damp sand where the wash narrowed. A line of prints came from the far side, long bare impressions, heel and toe clear, 4 of them in the mud. The 5th should have been there. Instead, the trail stopped in mid-stride as if the person had taken one more step and left the world before the foot came down. Sarah paced outward in widening loops. No continuation. No side exit. No drag marks. No collapse point. Nolan laughed once, thin and forced, and said maybe the ground had hardened. It had not. I knelt and touched the edge of one print. The sand still held the sharp crumble of a fresh break. Then the canyon went silent. I do not mean quiet in the ordinary way. I mean every insect line cut off at once. No bird movement in the brush. No wind touching leaves. Even the faint grit tick of cooling stone seemed to stop. The silence was so complete that when Nolan shifted his weight, the scrape of his boot sounded rude, like a voice in church. Eli stood up from his camp chair and told us to get inside the shack before the sun left the highest wall. We did. Sarah shut the warp door and told everyone to stay on headset. Tessa kept filming through a gap in the boards. The first hour of dark passed with nothing but our breathing and the soft hiss of equipment. Then Nolan pointed at his recorder. One of the ambient channels had picked up footsteps circling us in the dirt. The problem was that we had heard none of them. The waveform was clear. Slow steps, measured. 3 on one side. Pause. 2 on the other. Then a scrape along the outside wall, low and deliberate. Sarah called out, "State Park. Identify yourself." No answer came back. A minute later, her own voice came from the ravine. Not similar. Not close. Her exact voice, flattened by distance. "State Park. Identify yourself." Tessa lowered the camera. Nolan looked at Sarah with his mouth open. Sarah said nothing for a full 5 seconds. Then she told us all to keep our eyes off the doorway and not respond. Eli took a small buckskin pouch from his coat and set it on the floor between us. "If it calls you," he said, "you say nothing. If it asks where you are from, you say the name of your mother and keep your face down." Nolan said, "Why would it ask that?" Eli looked at him. "Because it wants the right person." At 9:14 p.m., Tessa's left camera battery went from 60% to dead between one frame and the next. Nolan checked his recorder. Full charge, then blank. Sarah keyed her radio to the rim station. Static answered. She tried the emergency channel. Static again. The silence outside deepened until I could hear the dry click in my own throat when I swallowed. Then someone knocked on the shack wall 3 times. Not a branch. Not shifting wood. 3 spaced knocks, shoulder height. Nolan forgot the rule. He said, "Hello." Eli shut his eyes. A few seconds later, from beyond the fenced rectangle, Nolan's sister called his name. I know he had a sister because he had shown us her graduation picture on his phone before we went down. The voice outside matched the one on a video clip he had played at lunch. Young woman. Amarillo accent. Laugh worn into the edges of it. "Nolan," she said. "Come here a second." He stood before Sarah could catch his sleeve. Sarah grabbed the back of his shirt and told him to sit down. Nolan said, "That's not funny." He pulled free. Tessa reached for him. Too late. He opened the door and stepped out into the dark. The silence outside swallowed him. We heard his boots on dirt for maybe 4 steps. Then nothing. Sarah was out after him with a flashlight before Eli could stop her. Tessa and I followed because nobody with any decency leaves a man alone in a canyon at night. The light from the shack spilled weakly across the wash. Nolan was gone. His recorder lay near the fence post. One ear cup twisted off. 10 yards farther out we found his boots. Side by side, heels touching. Toes toward the ravine Eli had warned us about. Sarah walked a fast grid. Tessa kept the beam high. I found Nolan's tracks at the wash. 2 running steps deep in the sand. Then the trail ended mid-stride exactly like the older prints. Not turned aside. Not covered. Ended. Nature stayed silent the whole time we searched. We made it back to the shack before midnight and barred the door with the cot frame. No one spoke for several minutes. Tessa sat on the floor with the camera against her chest and watched the crack under the door as if something might flow through it like water. Sarah made one more attempt on the radio. Nothing. Eli opened the buckskin pouch. Inside was red earth, a twist of dried cedar, and a folded note. He handed me the note but told me not to read it until daylight unless he said otherwise. Near 2 a.m., footsteps crossed the roof. The shack roof would not hold a grown man. We all knew that. The steps crossed it anyway, left to right, slow enough for us to count. Then a weight settled directly above Sarah. Dust drifted down over her shoulders. She did not move. A long inhalation came through the boards, as if whatever was above us could draw air through wood and nails and old tar paper and take stock of each person beneath it. At dawn the sounds stopped. Birds began again all at once, so loud it hurt. We found Nolan at first light half a mile from the shack, seated upright against a red wall in a place with no prints leading in or out. His skin was cool. His eyes were open. There was no blood, no tearing, no broken neck, no fracture. His face looked thinned, not starved, not weathered, but drawn inward as if time had leaned on him too fast. Sarah touched his throat, then stepped back and did not say a word. Tessa turned away and vomited in the greasewood. Sarah decided we were leaving. Not after breakfast. Not after another take. Immediately, we packed in silence. Eli refused to let us take the boots. "Leave arranged things arranged," he said. Sarah did not like that, but she left them. The climb out should have taken us toward open ground by noon. We never got there. At the first fork above the wash, Sarah saw movement on a ridge and went ahead to clear the route. She was our authority, our most experienced person in the canyon, and that is why it took her next. Tessa heard Sarah's radio crackle with her own voice giving an all clear from somewhere above us. At the same moment I saw Sarah herself 30 yards downslope, turning because she had heard it too. She looked back once. The ravine behind her darkened in a way no morning shadow should. Something taller than the brush leaned through the stone gap, jointed wrong in the little that showed, stride too long, head never fully clear of the wall. Sarah raised her light though it was day. The air went silent again. She made one short sound and dropped where she stood. When we reached her, her heart was done. No wound, no snake bite, no stroke sign we could see. Eli put 2 fingers against her wrist and then covered her face with his bandana. Tessa broke then. Not with crying. With method. She began listing batteries, water, lenses, remaining flare count, distance to the truck. People do that when the mind needs edges. Eli told us the name at last. He said it in old Kiowa words that I will only spell as I heard them. San Kayab, which he translated for me as the one that drinks the last breath. He said the old people knew it long before the soldiers came in 1874, long before the ranch road, long before the park signs and brochures. He said there were marks in hidden stone shelters older than any cavalry record that showed the same long step and the same bent head. He said it does not take flesh because flesh is not what it came for. It gathers what leaves first, he told me. The body is only what falls behind. By late afternoon, the canyon had bent us back toward the line shack, though none of us meant to return there. That was when I understood the worst thing about it. Planned. It used our need for help, our need for the known route, our trust in sound. It could put a voice where a person was not. Could take the trail away from under a man's feet. It could thin distance between one wall and the next until you walked in a circle and believed it was escape. At sunset, Eli opened the note and finally let me read it. It was written in block letters, probably that morning while we slept in turns. If I die before we reach the rim, keep your face to the ground when it comes near. Do not answer your own name. Say your mother's name. Offer water to the dirt. It will listen for what claims you. The second night came down hard. No transition. Light gone. Silence back. Tessa held my arm so tightly I lost feeling in 2 fingers. From the ravine came my late father's voice, then my own son at age 6, then Eli as a young man, though I had never heard Eli young. Each voice asked a simple thing. Come here. Look at this. Just 1 second. Eli told us to kneel. He put the dried cedar in my hand and tipped a little water from our last bottle onto the dust. We bowed our heads. The steps circled us. Nearer. 1 pass. Another. On the third I saw, at the edge of my lowered sight, a leg cross the gap between 2 beams outside the shack. Too high. Too smooth in motion. 4 feet of ground in a single step. Tessa began to raise her head at the sound of her mother calling. Eli caught the back of her neck and pushed her down. Then he stood. He stood because beloved people do that. They spend themselves where others are still counting what they have left. He stepped through the doorway and said in Kiowa what I was not meant to repeat. The silence changed shape around him. I heard one hard impact, as if a shoulder had met the outer wall. And then Eli told us, very clear, now. Tessa and I ran. We ran with our faces wet from dust and spilled water, not looking behind us, saying our mother's names when the canyon tried ours back at us. I remember the climb as fragments. Red stone under my palms. Tessa falling and rising. A flare burning white against a wall. The sound of something pacing us from just inside the side draws. Never rushing, never out of breath. We reached the service road near dawn. A volunteer fire unit found us walking in the middle of it, heading the wrong direction. Tessa still had the camera. I still had Eli's note. The county report listed Nolan's death as probable exposure with acute confusion. Sarah's death became cardiac event under physical strain. Eli's remains were entered under animal scavenging and terrain damage, which would have been laughable if I had not seen the bag they carried out. The official report was wrong in ways easy to prove. It said the weather posed elevated heat risk. The overnight temperature had dropped low enough to make that impossible. It said Nolan removed his boots during a dissociative episode, though both boots were found upright and paired in clean sand away from his body. It said Sarah likely suffered an undiagnosed heart problem, though the medical examiner later admitted to me that her heart showed no infarct pattern, no clot, no electrical scarring, nothing he could name with confidence. He said, I can tell you she died. I cannot tell you by what mechanism. Then he asked me not to quote him. I went into archives after that because paper can betray a lie if you stack enough of it together. In old ranger incident logs, local newspaper clippings, and county death notices, I found the same shape repeating. Summer of 1931, ranch hand found below a side draw, boots arranged. August 1957, teenage brothers hear their mother calling from a dry wash after she has already gone home. One dies before reaching the rim. September 1974, A park maintenance worker reports prints ending in open ground and resigns 2 weeks later. June 1988. One survivor says the canyon used her husband's voice to lead her toward a cut bank. In every decade, the record bent toward the same false answers. Heat, exposure, heart failure, getting lost in familiar ground. An echo death each time. The heart stopping clean. The trail ending where walking should have gone on. Eli had known all of that without needing my folders. Indigenous people already knew it existed. The old knowledge was not theory. It was procedure. Count the children. Leave before dark. Do not answer what calls you from the wrong place. Keep your face down. Offer water to the dirt. Speak the name of the one who gave you life. In Eli's note on the backside I did not see until weeks later, he had written one more line. It does not always finish at once. Watch the heart. That line mattered. 2 earlier witnesses from separate cases, both people who lived through their first encounter, died years later of unexplained heart failure in their 40s. Tessa lasted longer than I hoped and shorter than I prayed. In 2023, for years after we came out, she collapsed in an editing suite in Albuquerque. 36 years old. No drug history. No structural defect. Her heart stopped between one frame and the next like a battery going full to blank. Her assistant told me the audio timeline on her screen held a section she had never been able to clean up from our canyon footage. Footsteps circling in silence. Palo Duro Canyon is still open to the public today. Families go there. Hikers go there. Photographers wait for evening light on the red walls and leave with good pictures and dust on their cuffs. Most visitors have a normal, pleasant day and nothing follows them home. But there are nights, mostly in late summer and early fall, when the wind drops all at once inside the lower cuts, the insects stop, and a voice reaches you from a place where no person could be standing. Nobody connects those cases because the reports never line up in one office and the names belong to different decades. If you go, leave before dark. If you do not leave before dark, do not follow a voice into a side ravine. If you hear your own name spoken by someone who should not be there, keep your eyes on the ground and keep walking. The canyon is beautiful. It is also old enough to hide a pattern from people who believe maps are stronger than memory. I survived because it let me. That is the part that keeps me awake at night.